If you lead a double life, you can be an easy target for criminals. A criminal can hide behind the sweetest and most innocent image of a person. In 1994, Miranda Dean was born in the small town of North Pole, Alaska, USA. Her mother's name was Elizabeth. The father's name is reliably unknown. The man was not interested in the child's fate from the beginning. The girl also had an older sister named Ashley. The two girls were raised by a single mother. From the start, their life was not easy. At just 2 years old, Miranda was diagnosed with congenital hip dysplasia. Because of this, she had to wear a special brace from a young age to be mobile. This was, of course, difficult for her. The girl was often seen as an outsider. Things were going badly for her mother, Elizabeth. There were problems at work. She couldn't handle her daughters. During this time, she received support from her sister, whose husband was named Richard. He was a soldier and seemed like a decent man. The two often came to her house and even babysat the children sometimes. And the man readily offered his help even in his wife's absence. However, as it turned out, his initiative was of a much darker nature. When Miranda and Ashley were 5 and 6 years old respectively, Richard raped the girls. The man persuaded the children not to tell anyone about the incident. Only after several years did the eldest daughter find the strength to overcome the fear and speak about the torment. This is how Elizabeth found out that the man close to her had been raping her children for years. When she contacted the police and officers searched Richard's house, they found a diary documenting all the sexual assaults on the girls. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but was released after 4 years for good behavior. It was also the first criminal episode in Richard's life, which contributed to his parole. The child rapist was released when Miranda and Ashley were 9 and 10 years old respectively. At that time, they were still struggling with the effects of the psychological trauma and experiencing it in different ways. When the mother and children learned that the perpetrator would be released, it was a huge shock. Elizabeth and her children decided to move to another city. During this time, her situation kept getting worse. There were financial difficulties and the family had been abused by a loved one. All of this became a major problem. In their hometown, there was practically no support left and it was impossible to live near the threat. The single mother hoped for a fresh start, but moving did not help them cope with the consequences of the inflicted psychological trauma. From the age of 12, Miranda began to display rebellious behavior. She started spending time in the company of older teenagers who turned out to be dysfunctional. She took illegal substances and drank constantly. These were 15 to 16-year-old teenagers into whose company a 12-year-old girl fell. To fit into this strange group, she also began to do all these things. During this time, she met Forrest. At the time, he was 24 years old and the guy was notorious. Unfortunately, from a young age, Miranda was attracted to such lowlifes. Thanks to this acquaintance, Miranda managed to become part of the society of teenagers with unconventional interests. They called themselves a satanic group and most people considered them dark and dangerous. The schoolgirl didn't spread the word about becoming a member of this group, but clearly joined thanks to Forrest. The man had lured her into a kind of ritual after which her soul belonged to him. When Miranda finally told her mother what had happened, Elizabeth tried to sever all her daughter's contacts with this unhealthy society. Unfortunately, it didn't help. The teenager's behavior only worsened. She began running away from home frequently, became addicted to hard illegal substances. Her school performance deteriorated significantly, as did her relationships with her classmates. She became very aggressive and often provoked fights. The situation continued to deteriorate. Elizabeth herself suffered from similar addictions and was now reaping the consequences. Unexpectedly, the biological father intervened at this stage of the child's life. As far as is known, this was the only serious influence he had on the teenager's life. At his urging, Miranda was placed in a psychiatric clinic to help her cope with the effects of her trauma. She was prescribed medication and diagnosed with a mental disorder. Unfortunately, it helped little, according to people familiar with the dysfunctional family. At the age of 16, Miranda decided to drop out of school and never get an education, but she also immersed herself in wild parties with her unpleasant company. She began a series of relationships with older men, by one of whom she became pregnant. Although she decided to keep the child, she didn't even know who the biological father was. In parallel, the relationship with her family deteriorated to the extreme. Ashley couldn't bear to see her mother and sister become outcasts and was forced to leave the house, so the only support for the rebellious girl was gone. Elizabeth was also already on a downward spiral at this point. She was heavily addicted and looked very bad. After her first overdose, social services decided to take her youngest daughter Miranda away. So the problem-laden teenager went to a new family in the small town of North Carolina, and there she met a 20-year-old man named Elytte Barbour. Miranda was 17 years old at the time, and the young man was engaged to a girl who was expecting his child. Her name was Elytte, and she was also a 17-year-old student. The result was a kind of love triangle between a 20-year-old boy and two underage pregnant girls at once. The children were born about a month and a half apart. Now they had two newborns to care for. However, neither of them was truly mature enough to handle the responsibility. This almost changed tragically. A few months after the children were born, Elyette's own daughter was hospitalized with an overdose of sedatives. The behavior of the child's biological father had always been problematic, and from then on it got worse. The relationship with his fiancée began to deteriorate. She decided to break up with the inadequate man, broke off the engagement, and moved with the child to another city. So Elyette and Miranda found each other, became a full-fledged couple, and began raising little Elyette together. During this time, Miranda willingly talked about her difficult past. This is how Elyette learned about the Satanist sect and became very fascinated by the topic. The couple began regularly exchanging ideas on this subject. After about a year of their relationship, they decided to leave North Carolina because the young people's families disapproved of their lifestyle. This escape was necessary to increase the distance between them and avoid constant conflicts and surveillance by the older generation. So began a series of moves together with little Elyette. They couldn't settle down anywhere for a long time. There were difficulties with finding employment. The final destination was a suburb in Pennsylvania, a small community called Portrayon, where only about 400 people lived at the time. The young parents had no money and no job to settle down as they had before. But here Elyette had a friend and they visited him. The man was about the same age and offered the family a room to share until the Barbours got back on their feet. However, since they were outcast young people, it wasn't easy to find a proper job. They were so unsociable that it was impossible to start a conversation with a stranger. This also complicated their situation considerably. The couple got married on October 22, 2013. To find a source of income, Miranda decided to offer herself as an escort. However, on the website, she emphasized that she was not offering intimate services but was much more willing to make connections and accompany men to various events. Outwardly, she seemed quite nice and it paid off. She met various men and chatted with them for $80 without any intimate contact occurring. It's hard to say if she really respected those stated boundaries. In any case, she met a man named Troy LaFerrara, who turned out to be a 42-year-old married man. He had been married for a few decades, was a decent family man and church member, but he led a second life on the side. On one hand, he was a respectable member of society, on the other, a regular client of call girls. When he saw the new young woman's ad, Troy was immediately interested in the offer. As soon as he called, he immediately offered Miranda a different kind of service. Not accompaniment to dinners, but intimacy. She was upset about this, refused him, and pointed out what was stated in her account. However, once she calmed down, disturbing thoughts came to her. Miranda and Elyette realized that this was a fairly wealthy man, as he had made a very generous financial offer. After discussing it, the young people realized they could make money through crime. Even before, they had repeatedly fantasized painfully about murder. But now they began to see in it not only a secret desire, but also a way to solve their financial difficulties. In general, Elytte and Miranda had been drawn to this topic from the beginning of their relationship. They immediately showed a shared interest in satanic rituals and were particularly interested in sacrifices and ritual acts. They even used the theme in their role-playing during intimacy. In their fantasies about murder, they doused each other with fluids representing blood. They didn't plan to kill a specific person, but their conversations often ended with the thought that sooner or later they would find their victim and find out what it was like to take a human life. When Troy made his generous offer, the young women immediately activated their sick fantasies. Miranda had sinister thoughts, and after the unpleasant offer, she began discussing the situation with Elytte. Troy lived in another city. The conversation was conducted over the internet and could easily be deleted by deleting the profile. They were in no way connected in real life, which made the man the perfect victim for a ritual murder. The criminals realized they could make good money from this and fulfill their long-cherished dream. A few hours later, Miranda accepted Troy's offer and texted the unsuspecting victim. They arranged to meet in a supermarket parking lot on the outskirts of town. She would be sitting in her car. Miranda offered to drive to the neighboring suburb. There, according to the escort, was her summer house, which she used for her work. Of course, she didn't just take the initiative. Her boyfriend was supposed to be sitting in the back seat of the car, helping her realize her dark fantasies. He was to be camouflaged with clothes and a blanket. The aspiring killers hatched a plan. Miranda would say a code phrase, upon which Elytte would attack the victim. The meeting was set for November 11, 2013. This date was not chosen by chance, as it was the boyfriend's birthday. At the appointed hour, a Honda CR-V was waiting for the man in the shopping center parking lot. He got in and immediately paid her the agreed amount. They drove to the neighboring town, also small and remote. But Miranda didn't go to the house she talked about, instead going to a remote location, a quiet, deserted street in the wooded belt. Here she stopped and said a code phrase, whereupon a wire was looped around Troy LaFerrara's neck. Elytte pulled it as tight as she could, but they had miscalculated his strength. The chosen victim turned out to be a fairly robust and strong man. He had enough strength to open the door and even put a foot on the street. Elytte quickly weakened. Miranda gradually became nervous because the matter should have been finished long ago, but things weren't going according to plan. The criminals hadn't expected such strong resistance, but the worst was when the criminals saw car lights in the distance in her rearview mirror. She realized they could be caught, and she drew the knives she had prepared for the slaughter. Miranda began stabbing her victim about 20 times in the chest, neck, face, and stomach. When Troy stopped resisting or even showing any sign of life, Elytte got out of the car, put his foot inside, and closed the door from the outside. Then she got back into the back seat and the car drove off. The young people made their way to another remote part of the suburb. Here they took a wallet, an expensive watch, jewelry, and everything they could find in his pockets except for a mobile phone. Elytte insisted it wasn't worth taking. After all, they could be located via geolocation. The two placed their victim's body by the roadside and drove away, believing they had committed the perfect crime. Next, Miranda and Elytte drove to the nearest Walmart, where they bought cleaning supplies to clean the interior of the car. These were special products for the seats and floor mats, as well as a pair of gloves they intended to use. The front of the car was stained with blood. They really needed more than an hour to clean everything thoroughly. For this, they drove to another remote location where the two diligently wiped away the blood. After that, it was decided to celebrate Elyette's birthday. They went to a restaurant and then to a strip club. Of course, they used the money they had stolen from their victim for this. The young people continued their normal life as if nothing had happened. The next day, a couple of onlookers found Troy's body. It wasn't even covered with branches or dirt. The man had simply been thrown away like trash, with 20 stab wounds and strangulation marks on his neck. Of course, the witnesses immediately called the police. When officers arrived at the crime scene, they found not only the body but also the appliance cord used to strangle him. The body could be identified very quickly as there was a mobile phone in the pocket with which the owner could be identified. The police immediately looked at the call history records. It turned out that on November 11, he had only contacted 2 people. The first number was his spouse and the second was an unsaved contact. The police traced the call back to Miranda. All her data, including her place of residence, were obtained and she immediately aroused the interest of the investigators. Minutes later, the police were on their way to her apartment. There she was arrested and taken to the station for questioning. From the beginning, Miranda denied any involvement in the crime and any acquaintance with Troy whatsoever. Nevertheless, it was obvious that she was nervous and behaving suspiciously. It was enough to ask for her mobile phone for her statement to change. At first, she vehemently refused to give her phone to the police, but she had no choice. As the investigators examined the contents, the correspondence, and the contacts, Miranda became increasingly nervous. Still, it wasn't possible to find the needed information immediately. She had nothing to show for it and was simply released. When Miranda returned home, something changed in her. She poured her heart out to the first person she met. She confessed to the murder, but she did it so abruptly that it seemed like a bad joke. From the beginning, the young man tried to convince the criminal to go back to the police and confess everything. Her husband joined the conversation and acted as if he was surprised by the story. Miranda clearly felt remorse. She confessed to her buddy that she had stabbed the victim but said nothing about Elytte. The husband did not admit even once during the entire conversation that he was even present in the car. Even the friend felt that he was manipulating Miranda and trying to burden her with more guilt. This seemed strange and caused great concern. Instead of taking the blame, Elytte acted shocked and even began to cry. His buddy didn't suspect that Elytte could be involved in the crime. On the contrary, he believed he wasn't involved. Miranda struggled with inner doubts almost all night. Finally, around 4 a.m., she pulled herself together, returned to the police station, and told them about the murder, but insisted it was self-defense. Miranda now admitted that she had indeed arranged to meet the man, not for intimate services, but to accompany him for the evening. However, Troy changed his plans and insisted he was ready to pay for sex. When Miranda informed him that she was only 16 years old, he was disbelieving. She claimed that the man would be prosecuted if she reported him to the police. This was obviously a lie, as she was already 17 years old at the time. She was clearly trying to shift some of the blame onto the victim to justify her cruelty with his harassment. According to her, Troy, instead of backing off, began to forcibly try to make her intimate, and she had to defend herself. He allegedly became aggressive when he realized she didn't want to have sex with him for money. Miranda claimed that she felt her life was threatened and realized it could end tragically. She told them about her own uncle Richard, who had molested her as a preschooler. Of course, her words sounded unbelievable because the 20 stab wounds in various parts of his body, which didn't look like defense, hardly resembled an attempt to defend herself. Furthermore, the cord used to strangle the man was found with a mark on the victim's neck and his larynx was crushed. In Miranda's statement, the cord wasn't mentioned at all. Something was clearly wrong and it seemed a third person was involved. To verify her statements, the police began tracking her movements before the encounter with Troy. It wasn't hard to find video footage taken just 5 minutes before the meeting in the parking lot. The footage clearly shows an unknown young man hiding in the back seat of a car. He could also be quickly identified. After determining it was the 22-year-old Elytte, Miranda's newlywed husband, the investigators decided to speak with the young man. The criminals had obviously not devised a plan, as at this point they didn't even have a coherent story. Finally, Elytte began to tell a story that was completely different from what Miranda had said. The investigators immediately noticed that she was very emotional, while her boyfriend showed no feelings whatsoever. He was cold but surprisingly easy to crack, as if he had long wanted to talk about the atrocity he had committed. When describing the crime, he briefly described the assault itself, but took much more time describing the list of purchases made with the stolen money. He vividly described the meals they had eaten on his birthday, as if the murder of the man didn't bother him at all against this background, and described the taste of the meat he had eaten after the massacre as if he killed daily. Both were subsequently arrested and held behind bars until the trial began. However, by that day they had both retracted their statements and were now professing their innocence. This stood in stark contrast to what Miranda had said on the eve of the hearing in a television program. Several journalists had spoken with her. Thus, the pretty woman became a participant in an interview that went viral. In it, she claimed this was not her first murder. Allegedly, after the 22nd murder committed between 2008 and 2013, she stopped counting the victims. But all this seemed absurd. Her family defended her, while everyone who knew her well insisted that she had lied her whole life. The reasons for such actions were always the same. Miranda simply wanted to draw attention to herself and enjoyed it. Nevertheless, the perpetrator insisted that all the murders began when she was a teenager and became a member of a satanic group, which she was drawn to by a boy named Forrest. Miranda couldn't even provide the names of the victims, but insisted on calling herself a serial killer. She claimed that her company only killed people who did bad things, for which she earned the nickname Dextrum. The investigators were forced to check these claims. In conversation, she was unable to say anything about these episodes, of which she admitted there were many more. In the area where she lived in Alaska during that time, there weren't even that many missing persons. It seemed as if this was all a blatant lie. Furthermore, her behavior clearly did not match that of an experienced criminal. She had even left the victim's mobile phone in his pocket. She didn't hide or destroy it, even though it was obvious that the communication device would allow the perpetrators to be reached. The only reason she might not have known this is that Miranda was lying. Troy LaFerrara had indeed been the first victim. During the investigation, it turned out that 2 other men had responded to Miranda's ad but didn't show up, thus saving their lives. However, there were also contrary opinions. Psychologists worked extensively with Miranda. Some of them were convinced that she had killed people before. Even Elytte had told many stories, including all these ritual murders. Listening to these stories had been one of his favorite activities during their relationship. The guy remained convinced that Miranda had killed other people. She spoke extensively and eloquently about these episodes but refused to repeat them to journalists, allegedly to avoid harming other participants in the murders. Elytte believed that his girlfriend was possessed by a demon during those times. He believed she was possessed. The prosecution was convinced that the criminals were trying to avoid the death penalty by reason of insanity in this way. All of this made the trials very complicated and lengthy. Before the hearings could begin, at least one of the many accusations against the inmates had to be proven or disproven. In 2016, things were still uncertain, but other upheavals had begun. Miranda's mother voluntarily took her own life. She couldn't withstand the public pressure that accused her of raising a monster. By that time, she had already been struggling with addiction problems and mental health issues for years. Those close to her believed the woman simply couldn't cope. She left no suicide note, so it's not known for sure what contribution the criminal daughter made to her decision. Many believed public pressure over Miranda was the deciding factor. In the same year, the offender, while sitting in prison, filed for divorce from Elytte. She repeatedly said that she was a victim. From the day she was born, Miranda was surrounded by manipulators, liars, rapists, and criminals. According to stories from gang members she belonged to, Miranda once told how she was tied to a bed and had an abortion at home. This happened when she told her mother she was pregnant and didn't know who the father was. Her boyfriend Forrest allegedly forced her into prostitution at the age of 12, but it's hard to say what is true. Although she was diagnosed with several disabilities in the hospital, it is not known if she ever took medication for attention deficit syndrome, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, which doctors suspected during her examinations at various times. The pathological liar felt the audience's attention and interest and continued to tell one story after another. Now she remembered the name of Aria's biological father, who in her opinion had been killed in another ritual. Then she began to say that she had gone to the police voluntarily because she wanted to be arrested to finally stop killing. According to another version, she had come to the station to have her daughter taken away so the child could be saved from the marginalized existence she led with her husband. The perpetrators were found guilty. However, difficulties arose in determining the sentence due to the young age of the attackers. The prosecution fought in vain for the death penalty, but without success. Organizations advocating for the abolition of the death penalty made an important contribution. Finally, in September 2014, they were sentenced to life in prison. Aria ended up in the care of foster services. Since the scandal attracted great attention, her first and last name were changed and she was placed in a foster family. The murder shocked Troy LaFerrara's wife the most. She had no idea he led a double life, but what shocked her even more was the tragic resolution of the case. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.